So now to finish this session today, at last, or at least, but not last, we have Scott, which has been, Scott has been collaborating with us since we began the QTune project. And he is based at Stanford University, doing his PhD in composition over there. And because this area is so new, I think he probably found interesting interactions with our group down here in this side of the pond. So Scott is going to talk about his most recent project, quantum bit generation. So we have to prepare ourselves now to listen to some very cool rhythms that Scott's going to generate with his QuiKo system. The floor is yours, Scott.
All right, thank you. Let me go ahead and show my screen. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Oshiro. I'm a PhD candidate at Stanford University's Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, also known as CARMA. Today, I will be talking about a specific application I've been working on. And it's actually one application in a string of applications that I've been working on since I started quantum computing back in 2019. But I'll be talking about my QuiKo system for quantum beat generation. So I'll go briefly over how I got into quantum computing and then where it started and what was the first ideas I conceived of. But back in 2019, I became interested in quantum computing after I read an article that they were going to have a quantum computing kids kit camp down in South Africa, Johannesburg. So I emailed around and I was able to go down to this hackathon in South Africa in December 2019. And if you look on the picture on the left, we see a familiar face, Omar here. He was actually my mentor for that hackathon. And then also had another mentor, Lauren, and then my teammate on the right-hand side, Teshbang. But we had 24 hours to complete a project using Qiskit and to actually come up with a project and then build it out within 24 hours using Qiskit. And what my team decided we wanted to do was build a music generation system. Initially, we wanted to take in some kind of raw audio file or audio track, and then have the system generate some music based off the features of that input audio track. But 24 hours is not a long time, and I hadn't done too many hackathons before that. So we actually simplified it to work on it for just one day. So on top of that, me and my teammate were pretty new to quantum computing at the time. So we developed this very simple application called QBeats. And what it did was we generated two MIDI files with two specific rhythms, two different rhythms. And then we mapped them to existing quantum circuits or quantum algorithms and protocols. So we did two circuits, the Bell state and the teleportation state. And what we did was we mapped each MIDI track to one of the qubits, and then we represented in the rhythm of it in ones and zeros. So a 0 would represent a rest, and then a 1 would represent a drum hit. So we fed it through these circuits, and then we measured them, and we did the whole process of setting up the circuit and measuring it, and we did it like about 1,024 times. And then what we measured out was our new generated beat. So here's just a basic demo of it. Switch over here, and hopefully you can all hear this. So that was the original two tracks. That was the original track we fed into it. The second one is what we fed through the Bell circuit. And then the third one is what we fed through the teleportation circuit. So that was qubits, and that was actually my first quantum computing project. And then when I came back to Stanford, I actually took a quantum computing class to get a better understanding of different quantum algorithms. And for my final project, I built out the first iteration of QuiKo, which was just what I wanted to do initially from the hackathon project. So this is the initial design of QuiKo. And what we did was I took in a raw audio wave file, and then I did some signal processing on it to extract some musical features from the audio file. So specifically what I used was something called the harmonic percussive source separation algorithm, and that can be found in the Labrosa package in Python. So if you just Google Labrosa Python, you should see that package come up straight up in Google, and you can kind of read through the documentation. But what this algorithm specifically does is it attempts to separate the percussion elements, the percussive elements of the signal, and then the harmonic content of the signal as well. So they do this through some special filtering. I won't get into it right now, but from that, I have two versions of the signal, one that's based in the percussive elements and one that's based in the harmonic elements. And then I do some feature extraction on those two things. And then I get some metrics that I can feed, that I can encode onto my quantum circuit. And then the two algorithms that I was interested in using for this particular project was the quantum Fourier transform and then phase estimation. Actually, more specifically, just phase estimation, since the quantum Fourier transform is inside the phase estimation algorithm. But here is what came out of it. So this is what I fed into the system. This was a conga solo for one of my favorite musicians. Last 30 seconds here. And then I took I did the same thing I did with qubits, and I took the classical string out, and then I kind of mapped them to some MIDI file in Logic Pro. And the first one here, I mapped it to an arpeggiator. And that kind of keeps going on and on and on. And then I changed the instrument on it with the same MIDI file, and this is a little clearer version of what the melodic pattern is doing. This is with just some string instruments. So that was the basic idea and the initial idea for QuiKo. The issue here was that the way I mapped everything was a little bit random, in my opinion, and I kind of wanted to refine this algorithm itself. So I kind of continued to work on it, and as I collaborated with Dr. Miranda and the QTune project, I was able to do something a little bit more specific with this system. So what I wanted to do was take in a raw audio signal, and then I wanted the circuit to recognize the specific audio features that I fed into it. And then from a database of audio files, I wanted the circuit to pick out specific ones and then place them onto specific subdivisions and then create a beat. So just similar to a hip hop beat that you would see producers doing in Logic or Ableton Live. There we go. So as I tried to think about this, the architecture kind of blew up in my face. It kind of became a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. But in general, there are three main components to this system. One is the pre-processing system that handles all the feature extraction from the audio before it feeds it into the quantum circuit, and then the beat construction component of the system. So in the pre-processing, we see that we just taken a raw audio file, and then I added a new component in here where I filtered the audio signal into 3 subbands, one for low frequency content, one for mid band frequency content, and then one for high band frequency content. And then I perform the feature extraction as I did before. And then I take those measurements and I organize them in some kind of matrix and then encode them onto my quantum circuit. And then from there, I measure the quantum circuit over and over and over. And then I store that in my database. I store those probability distributions in my database. And that is for if I wanted to prepare the database. For the input audio signal, it's the same process, but in this case, I'm comparing my probability distributions with those in the audio database. So this is a little bit more of a deeper look into what's going on for each of those cases. So when I prepare my audio database, let's just say I have a list of, or a folder full of audio files. I go through each of those audio files. I feed them through a filter bank. So one through a low pass filter, and then through a band pass filter, and through a high pass filter. And then the user can control what those cutoff frequencies and the parameters of those filters are, goes through the feature extraction. In this case, I'm using the features I'm extracting from the signal are the spectral sinusoid, which describes the brightness of the signal, the pitch, and then the intensity of the onsets of all the drum hits. And then for the database, I'm feeding it through this simple circuit here, using these unitary gates, these generalized unitary gates. And then you can encode those features on those unitary gates. And then from there, you let those fall and collapse down. And then you can see what your probability distribution is going to be. You take that probability distribution and then you save it in your audio database for later. Same process is the same for the audio file that we want to feed into our system. And so we feed in the audio file, feed it through our filter bank, we get our features, and then I use two different circuits. So there's two different kinds I could choose from. One is what I'll talk about in the next slide, which is static encoding. And then the other one is PKBSE encoding, which is phase kickback sequencing encoding. And that one I made up completely myself because the static encoding has limitations that I very, very soon encountered. And then it does the same process where it finds its probability distribution after you measure it. And then instead of saving it into the database, it goes through the database and compares the probability distributions together. And then it finds which ones are closest and furthest away from the one for the input audio. So static encoding is actually based off of a quantum audio representation method that you will see tomorrow presented by Paulo, which is called the QRDA. And what it is for each time slice, we can encode or entangle certain qubits to do a certain task. So just like we did for the database circuit, we can have those parameters encoded on some qubit register, which we'll call the timbre register because it handles the spectral content of it. And then we entangle it to another qubit register, which we'll call the spinal cord for entangle it to its right correct time slice. So what we see here is this is called a multi-controlled unitary gate. So it looks and says, okay, is this qubit 0? Is this qubit 0? And is this qubit 0? If it is, if they all are, then apply this set of gates, right? If one of the qubits is 1 and the other two are 0, apply this gate, and then so on and so forth. So here we see we have like about 8 of these multi-controlled qubit gates, which represent two eighth notes within one measure of music. So for each of these, we can see that we encode our parameters, our features onto those circuits, onto those gates for the low band, mid band, and high band. And what my results found was this was a very solid method of doing it. But the limitation is that the cost of this gate is very, very large. So if we look on the right side, these are the basic gates that we need to build a quantum circuit. And so these are single qubit gates, which they apply to 1 qubit gates. And then we have 2 qubit gates, which entangle 2 qubits together. If we entangle more than 2 qubits together, the gate actually decomposes into single and 2 qubit gates. And because of that, it increases the cost, increases the decoherence and the noise associated with that circuit. So we will get a lot more error and a lot more noise with our results. So I came up with a alternative method for encoding these features onto the quantum circuits, and I call this phase kickback sequencing encoding. And what this is I just split the measure in half, that split the signal in half, and then for each subdivision, I kind of sum together the previous subdivisions from the current subdivision. So don't get too intimidated by this. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but the circuit looks like this. So bottom line is what I was able to do was I was able to represent and encode all those features I extracted in single and 2 qubit gates. So results and analysis. So what this, after I get my measurements from either of those circuits, from the quantum circuit, I'm comparing it to the probability distributions in my database. And then from there, I'm able to see which ones are the closest to my input and the furthest from my input. And then I'm able to organize them, the system's able to organize them into tables. So these are different results I've gotten, for different examples. And then from those tables, which contains the drum samples and the audio samples, I can then go into something like Logic, Ableton, and then kind of build them out just by, and put them in their correct subdivisions. Currently, I don't have that automatic. I do that manually. I am now trying to develop a way to connect my system to some of these softwares to be able to do this automatically, but yes. So here are some examples of audio that came through. So for the static encoding, one of my first test input audio tracks was Feel Away from Her. So this is the first measure from the song. Right? So I fed it through the static encoding and I ran it 3 times. First time sounded like this. Second time sounded like this. And then the third time sounded like this. And then this is for just one measure. And what I wanted to do was kind of extend it out to see if I can do this over and over and over to do a full song, just loop over a full song. So I took this song from Common. And then I also did something else with this one too. I actually sliced up the input audio and I fed it into the database. And I wanted to see if it actually picked out those audio samples from the input audio. And it actually did, which was actually a surprise to me. So that was a static encoding method, but that takes a lot of resources to run. So I tried out my alternative version for this circuit. And here's a new song that I did from Miki Matsubara. And that's just one measure. Fed it through the PKBSE. And this is one of them. And this is another one. And these are different degrees of how close they are to the input. Where's my mouse? There it is. That one actually kind of broke. And then this one's kind of like in the middle. It's not the most closest to the input, but it's not the furthest either. It's kind of straight in the middle. And then this one is also this Masego. Oh, why is it? No, it's not. Why is it? Yeah. Anyways, I think you guys get the point. Get the point of this. But since we're dealing with results that are closest and furthest in different degrees from the input audio, and from when comparing the input to the database, we have a different amount of beats that have been generated actually. So in order to kind of figure out what exactly was going on, I kind of adapted this metric called expressibility from a paper that came out in 2019. And this metric, what it does is it kind of tells us the flexibility or how much a quantum circuit can explore different quantum states. So I adapted it in this case for seeing how well it's picking out the audio files from my database. And this is just how I did it. And I came out with these graphs. So in general, these are the different beats, these layers are the different beats that have came out of my circuits. And then on the y-axis here, we see the expressibility. And the higher the expressibility, the more not flexible, the more rigid the system is. So it only pick out a couple samples, and that would be it for different input parameters. So I'm still working through this. The first set here is for a randomized database. And then down here is for a specific database of samples that I used over a different randomized input values. But what we can see here is that for a single database, we have more flexibility happening within these middle layers or these middle beats that are happening for both these the encoding methods. This one on the right here, on the bottom right here, I am not sure why it spikes up here exactly. So I got to do some more further research on that. But, and then the other thing was I kind of figured out, I kind of looked at and analyzed what was going on with the time register as well. And so one of the things that happens with the time register when you entangle the two registers together is that some effects happen when some of the effects of the quantum state get kicked back into the time register, and then the rhythms change. So ideally, we wanted it to be, kind of even, but from the parameters that we fed into it, it kicks back some of those parameters and it adjusts the states of the time register. So some beats will hit more often than others. So this is just what I kind of came out from simulators and actual quantum devices as well. And the comparison process is still done classically, which did kind of bother me because it's still not taking advantage of the quantumness of these machines. So I was able to get access to some of IBM's larger quantum devices. I think I ran this one on IBM Toronto. And what I did was I tried to put the whole process and the comparison process onto one circuit. And this is the comparator that I built out to compare the different audio samples from the input audio. And then I came out with this expressibility plot here that, as we can see, kind of flatlines after a certain layer, which in this case, if we're dealing with a lot of different audio samples, it's going to increase the amount of gates and the amount of resources used for these quantum circuits. And then it will decohere and eventually it will produce things that are not correct. Other future investigations, kind of playing around with the circuits themselves, kind of not putting everything in equal superposition, kind of playing with the state vectors of these different registers from the timbre register and the time register. And then I kind of want to continue to tune the phase kickback sequencing encoding method in order to see if I can get it to be a little bit more sounding more nice to say that. And then kind of playing with some more decoding methods for jittering these beats. And then kind of seeing how the system reacts to different types of audio samples and different types of databases for drum samples and longer melodic patterns. And that is it for my presentation. And then my email address, if you're interested in learning more about this project, is here. I have 2 email addresses. I have my Stanford email, and then I also have my Karma email as well. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. We have space for a couple of questions. Jim Weaver is asking, have you considered creating a DAW plugin that contains this functionality?
Yeah, I actually, I think that's also one of my next things I'm thinking about actually for that.
Yeah, it's a natural progression, isn't it? Because it's it's a very clear application of that can be commercially explored. I think it would be good to get into a stage where you have the plugin and you give the option for the user to connect to the actual quantum hardware to produce the effect.
Yeah.
That could have a simulation mode and the actual machine hardware mode, and hopefully you get into a stage where you can do certain things only with the hardware. And
Yeah.
that is that's the cool part of this. Are there any other questions? Let's see. I think there is some here. Does another type of encoding scheme comes to mind?
Actually, both of those. Well, the static encoding was based off quantum audio representation model, and Paula will talk more about that in depth tomorrow. But in general, both of those I developed myself, and I think the evolution to that would be to kind of include more resolution. So instead of just 1/8 notes, maybe go into 16th notes and 32nd notes. And I think I've started to initially experiment with that, but the resources, like the way the multi-control gates break down, it kind of causes the system to it causes the system to decohere a lot faster.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I think we should close this session.